Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Tech Tuesday. And we're starting a new series this week. And just a suggestion from last week was talk about carbs. Now, carbs, everybody knows about carbs. We always talk about carbs this and carbs that, and reduce your carbs, and you need extra carbs, or you don't have enough carbs, but what actually are carbs? And where do they feature and how do they feature? And are they the baddies that people make out to be? Do we need them or not? So we're going to find that out. Let me just share my screen over here. Use a couple of goodies. Okay, so carbohydrates, otherwise known as carbs, what are they? Both the good and the bad. So I took a lot of the information from two different articles. The first part was an article written by Chris Gunners, who is a BSc. And I put the link in there. If anybody wants the link to this particular article, you're welcome to drop me a line and I'll happily give you that link to follow up and see the original article, because I've taken a little bit here and a little bit there and I've mixed and matched as we've gone along. So the amount of carbs we should consume is a highly debated topic. Some people need more, some people need less. If you're going to be running Comrades in a couple of weeks' time, you probably need a lot of carbs. However, if you're going to be watching Comrades next week, you probably don't need quite as many carbs. Now, we do need some carbs to function well, but they could also contribute to weight gain and other health conditions. Obviously, if you're gaining weight, you're going to open yourself up to all sorts of other issues like diabetes and blood pressure problems and sore knees and all the rest. Now, some carbs may be healthier for us than others. Carbs or carbohydrates are molecules that have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms, exactly as the word describes. So there's your carb, which is carbon, your hyd, which is your hydrogen, and anything that says 8 is oxygen. So in nutrition, the word carbs refers to one of the 3 macronutrients, because you get macronutrients and you get micronutrients. And you also get trace elements. The other 2 macronutrients are protein and fat. So we need all 3 of those macronutrients. Just like we need oxygen, we also need the macronutrients, which is your carbohydrates, protein, and your fat. So dietary carbohydrates have 3 main categories. First one, obviously, is sugars. And these are the sweet, short-chain carbohydrates found in foods. And examples are glucose, fructose, galactose, and sucrose. Now, it is always best, obviously, when we talk about sugar, the first thing that comes to mind for most people is that white crystalline stuff that you put into your coffee or your tea. And yes, it is sugar. That is refined sugar, taken from your sugar cane and refined down to the little white crystals that we are familiar with. But sugar is our body's fuel. And if you are eating food, a single ingredient food as we call it, which is food found in nature, rather let your body convert its own sugar from that food, rather than giving it the processed or simple carbohydrates. The next thing is starches. These are long chains of glucose molecules which eventually get broken down into glucose in the digestive system. Again, glucose is energy. And then we have fiber. Humans cannot digest fiber, but the bacteria in the digestive system, pardon me, can make use of some types of fiber. Plus, eating fiber is vital to your overall health. Now remember, there's also different types of fiber. There's soluble, there's insoluble, there's lignans, there's pectins, there's a whole mess of different types of fiber, but we need that fiber because fiber is known as nature's broom, specifically the insoluble fibers. So one of the primary purposes of carbohydrates in our diet is to provide fuel for our bodies. Think of a sports car. I won't mention any brand names, but maybe a vehicle that Charlie's driving. If you don't put fuel in that vehicle, it's not going to do very much. It's going to look very impressive when it's parked on the side of the road, but it's not actually going to get you from Port Elizabeth to Bloemfontein. And it's not going to do anything unless it's got fuel. Exactly the same with our bodies. As we're lying in bed, sleeping, you are a body at rest and you don't need a lot of energy. You don't need a lot of fuel. However, when you open your eyes and you get out of bed and you start to move, if you don't have that fuel, you're probably going to move from lying down to lying further down on the floor. You're not going to get very far. So we need carbohydrates in our diet to provide fuel to get up and move around. Now, most carbs get broken down or transformed into glucose, which can be used as energy. Carbs can also be turned into fat, stored energy for later use. This is known, if you want the scientific term, it's potential energy. And Dr. Fred Hooper always likes to say when he talks about this, that some people have got a lot more potential energy than others, because potential energy is nothing until it is required and it becomes kinetic energy, which is the energy that we're burning or using when we move. So if we're moving and our body feels, okay, we need a boost of energy, so it takes the carbs, breaks them down into glucose, which becomes energy, which burns off. Exactly the same as fuel in your car. When you fill up your fuel tank, it's just sitting there. It's not doing anything. Needs a spark in the engine, and I'm not a mechanic. Please don't get me wrong. I don't know exactly. I've never been able to figure out exactly how a car works, but there's a whole lot of electricity and sparks and fire and flames under the bonnet of your car. So it's actually quite a volatile system. But until the key gets turned and until the spark gets set off to create the fire, to burn the fuel, that fuel sitting in the tank is doing nothing. You fill up your fuel tank, park your car in the garage for a month, your fuel consumption is going to be amazing. However, you fill up your fuel tank and you drive to Bloemfontein, you're going to have to fill up that tank again at least once, if not twice, on the way. So exactly the same with your stored energy. Now, fiber is an exception to the rule because it doesn't provide energy directly, but it does feed the friendly bacteria in the digestive system. So again, think of the little spark from the spark plugs in your engine to ignite the fuel to create the energy. So the fiber is the spark plug. It doesn't provide the energy directly, but it feeds the bacteria, so it sends the signal through to the spark plugs to ignite the spark, which then ignites the fuel, which burns with energy to turn the engine. These bacteria can use the fiber, pardon me, to produce fatty acids that some of our cells can use as energy. Obviously, all of our cells need to create energy for whatever their given task is. Now, sugar alcohols are also classified as carbohydrates. Think of your alcohol, booze that you're drinking, or the liquor. They taste sweet, but usually don't provide many calories. And they don't tend to be nutritive. You're not going to get a lot of nutrition from that bottle of whiskey or the bottle of wine that you are drinking. Now, we've got a couple of different types of carbs. And some of the terms we'll use over here are whole versus refined. Now, there are many different types of carbohydrate-containing foods, and they can vary in their health effects. Carbs are sometimes referred to as simple versus complex, or whole versus refined. Whole carbs are minimally processed and contain the fiber found naturally in the food, while refined carbs have been processed more and have had the natural fiber removed or changed. Think of sugarcane. Here in KZN, I don't know where you are, but where I am, pretty much wherever I drive, there are quite large fields of sugarcane growing in the area. Now, sugarcane is essentially part of the grass family. So if you take the cane itself, think of a reed, think of bamboo, the cane itself as a food is actually quite healthy because it's got the sugar, it's got the fiber, it's got the trace elements in it. So it's got vitamins and minerals and various other things, which are all good. What makes it bad is when they process out all the good stuff. They get rid of all the fiber, all the trace elements, and they keep the sugar crystals themselves. Then it becomes bad. That's a refined carb. So examples of whole carbs include things like vegetables, in other words, your complex carbohydrates, quinoa, barley, legumes, or your beans, potatoes, which is why they often give you, along the comrades route, they give you potatoes as one of the carbs to boost you as you're going along with the run. Whole grains, oats, beans are all examples of whole carbs or complex carbohydrates. On the other hand, refined carbs include things like your sugar-sweetened beverages. If you pick up something in a box or a bottle, read the label. We've covered how to read a label previously in earlier talks, but read the label. You'll be shocked at the number of things where sugar, because they won't tell you exactly the components of everything that you've got, so you don't know exactly how much of anything in there, but it's generally accepted that the first ingredient in the list contains the most, or is what is the most dominant ingredient in that particular product. And even some children's so-called nutrition supplements, the first ingredient on there is sugar. And sugar can also come in different names. So have a look at that, read the label and see it. But your sugar-sweetened beverages are one thing. Your white bread, a lot of them, sugar is one of the main ingredients there. Your pastries, so all the nice tasting things. Other items made with white flour, so your donuts and pie crusts, all that kind of thing. Now, numerous studies show that refined carbohydrate consumption is associated with health conditions like obesity and type 2 diabetes. Now, having a slice of white bread, a pastry, a sugar-sweetened beverage once a week or once a month is probably not going to lead to obesity and type 2 diabetes. Having them 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day, like a lot of people do, is however going to lead to these conditions. Now, refined carbohydrates tend to cause spikes in blood sugar levels, which can lead to a subsequent crash that can trigger hunger and lead to food cravings. Have you ever been traveling anywhere and I'm hungry now, and you grab a sugary treat, and suddenly you feel energized and you're awake and you feel great for about half an hour, and then all of a sudden you just have this crash. It's like you hit a wall and you've got no energy left, and you're now looking around for the next thing to eat because now I'm starving again. I was hungry. I had my sandwich made with white bread and margarine and all those other fun things, and it was great. But half an hour to an hour later, I feel like I haven't eaten anything for hours on end. So you either go into this slump where you're sitting wanting to go to sleep in front of your computer, or worse, behind the steering wheel of your car. And then suddenly you're looking for things to snack on. You're looking for that extra food. And mostly it's fast food and it's your sugar-laden goodies. And unfortunately, these things are usually lacking in many essential nutrients. I don't know when last you looked at the label on a loaf of white bread. So any of the nutrients that are there have been added. And I think it's Dr. Jim McAfee who likes to say that anything, also Fred Hooper, if you see something that's been enriched, what that means is that they've normally taken out between 13 to 16 essential nutrients and replaced them with 9 other nutrients, usually synthetic. So that's an enriched article, like a loaf of white bread, for instance. But you look at your pastries, there's probably, especially the dessert type ones, there's not a lot of essential nutrients or nutrition in those things. They taste good. They spike your sugar levels nicely to give you extra energy, but there's not a lot of food value in there. In other words, they're empty calories. Now, there are also added sugars, which should be limited, as diets high in added sugars are linked to an increased risk of many different chronic diseases. Think of the oats you have for breakfast in the morning. If you just have the oats exactly as it is, it doesn't taste that nice. However, if you add a little bit of sugar, it makes it taste a whole lot better. Now, some people just put on a half to a teaspoon of sugar and mix it in well, and it's enough to sweeten to their likes. Some people will put a tablespoon of sugar on, or more, that is really crunchy. Your breakfast cereals that we feed to the children, have a look at those, because in virtually all cases, the main ingredient is sugar. And the scary part is when I see kids have these things and then they add extra sugar. And it's a fight I've had with my kids over the years as well. You don't need to add extra sugar to sugar-rich cereals. Now, if we have oats for breakfast, which we do occasionally during the week, I will add honey to sweeten it as opposed to sugar. While it is important to limit your refined carbs and added sugars, whole carbs should be a part of a balanced diet. Now remember, too much of anything can be bad for you. Too much water can be bad for you. Too much oxygen can be bad for you. So everything in moderation, in balance. Whole food sources of carbohydrates are loaded with nutrients and fiber and don't cause the same spikes and dips in blood sugar levels. It's known as the glycemic index. And this is how our protein drinks have been formulated, in that they keep that glycemic load equal. So there's no sugar spikes, there's no sudden drops, but because of all the fiber in there and the natural sweetening, your energy levels rise and they stay consistent until they slowly burn off. And this is what a complex carbohydrate is so good for. Numerous studies on high fiber carbohydrates, including vegetables, fruits, legumes, and whole grains, show that eating them is linked to improved metabolic health and a lower risk of disease. So now you've got this low-carb diet conundrum. Professor Tim Noakes always talks about his low-carb, high-fat or high-protein diets, which he says is very good for diabetics. The debate is still out on that one, and even he's doing more and more research on that. So the diet is called LCHF, which is low-carb, high-fat, or you can replace the fat for protein, which is the recommended diet. No discussion about carbs is complete without mentioning low-carb diets. Now, please watch carefully where it says low carb. We're not talking no carb. It'll be the part 2 of my talk, where I talk about the no carb diets as well. But right now we're talking about the low carb. These types of diets restrict carbohydrates while allowing plenty of protein and fat, LCHF. Though there are studies that indicate that low-carb diets can help you lose weight, research tends to focus on those who have obesity, metabolic syndrome, and/or type 2 diabetes. In other words, those who need to lose the weight. Some of these studies show that low-carb diets can promote weight loss and lead to improvements in various health markers, including the HDL or the good cholesterol, good blood sugar, blood pressure, and others when compared with standard low-fat diet. However, a review of more than 1,000 studies found that while there were positive outcomes with low-carb diets, less than and at 6 to 11 months, pardon me, there wasn't a significant effect on cardiovascular risk factors after 2 years. So long-term, didn't show major benefits. But at least they didn't put on extra weight either. So here's the big other story, is that carbs are not the cause of obesity. Though limiting your carbs can lead to weight loss, it doesn't mean that eating carbs in and of itself is what caused the weight gain in the first place. This is actually a myth that's been debunked. While it's true that added sugars and refined carbs are linked to an increased chance of developing obesity, the same is not true of fiber-rich, whole food sources of carbohydrates. In other words, your complex carbohydrates, not your simple carbs. In fact, humans have been eating carbs for thousands of years in some form or another. Maybe only fairly recently, the simple carbs, but you've been eating carbs for all the generations. Yet the rate of developing obesity started growing around the mid-20th century, with an uptick around only 1980, when 4.8% of men and 7.9% of women had obesity. So think back. I remember back in the school days, it was very rare for anybody to be overweight. And even when I was in the army, we won't say how long ago, but it was in the 80s, it was very rare for anybody to be overweight. And I still remember we had one guy in our platoon who was overweight, and he had quite the round figure. And the comment from the guys at the time was, there's always one. Now, if you look at the same situation, it would be the odd one who's skinny, not overweight. So things have changed. And I mean, 1980 was not that long ago, if you really think about it. If you think too closely, it was ages ago, but it's not that long ago. Within more than just living memory. So today, our numbers have increased exponentially, and 42.4% of adults have obesity. Remember in 1980, which was only 40 years ago, what are the figures? 4.8% and 7.9% had obesity. Now it's 42.4% have obesity. Scary stats. It's also worth noting that some populations have remained in excellent health while eating a high-carb diet. The Okinawan people and the Kitavan Islanders, who consume a significant portion of their daily calorie intake from carbohydrates, have some of the longest lifespans. And think of the Inuit or the Eskimos, who have a diet very low in fruits and veggies, but very high in fats. And yet they've got the cleanest arteries of any nation in the world. And they just don't know what heart attacks are. What these people have in common is that they eat real unprocessed foods. In other words, foods that they've grown and eaten pretty much fresh from the natural factory. However, populations that consume a large amount of refined carbohydrates and processed foods tend to have a higher chance of developing negative health outcomes. So carbs are not essential, but many carb-containing foods are incredibly healthy. Now, many people following a low-carb diet claim that carbs are not an essential nutrient. This may be true to an extent, but they're a critical component of a balanced diet. Some believe that the brain doesn't need the recommended 130 grams of carbohydrates per day. While some areas of the brain can use ketones, the brain relies on carbohydrates to provide its fuel. Furthermore, the nutrition carb-containing foods, such as vegetables and fruits, provide a variety of health benefits because they are complex carbohydrates. Although it's possible to survive even on a zero-carb diet, it's probably not an optimal choice because you're missing out on plant foods that science has shown to be beneficial. Additionally, that extremely restrictive diet shouldn't be something that is embarked upon without speaking with your doctor. And I'm going to speak to a dietitian or a clinical nutritionist as well as your doctor, because with no disrespect to doctors, they are not taught in most cases about nutrition. So if you ask them about diets and restricting diets, they'll know the basics, but they probably won't know everything that you need. So it's always good to speak to a dietitian who is trained in diets and who work closely with doctors and clinical nutritionists as well. So how do we make the right choices? As a general rule, carbohydrates in their natural, fiber-rich form are healthy, while those stripped of their fiber are not. If it's a whole, single-ingredient food, then it's probably a healthy food for most people, no matter what the carbohydrate content is. Instead of thinking of carbs as either good or bad, focus on increasing the whole and complex options over those that are heavily processed. It is better to focus on what you're gaining instead of what it feels like you may be giving up. Things are really ever black and white in nutrition, but the following foods are a better source of carbs. And these are vegetables, all of them. It's best to eat a variety of vegetables every day. Whole fruits, your apples, bananas, strawberries, etc. Legumes, things like lentils, kidney beans, peas, etc. Nuts, such as almonds, walnut, hazelnut, macadamia nuts, peanuts, etc. And I'm going to add preferably raw and unsalted. Seeds, things like chia seeds and pumpkin seeds. And whole grains. Choose grains that are truly whole, as in pure oats, quinoa, brown rice, that sort of grain. And tubers, such as potatoes, sweet potatoes, etc. These foods may be acceptable in moderation for some people, but many will do best by limiting them as much as possible. Things like sugary drinks, these are sodas, juices with added sugar, and beverages sweetened with high fructose corn syrup. White bread, these are refined carbohydrates that are low in essential nutrients and have a negative effect on the metabolic health. And this applies to most commercially available breads. Read the labels. Pastries, cookies, and cakes, all those nice things. These foods tend to be very high in sugar and refined wheat. Ice cream. Most types of ice cream are very high in sugar, although there are exceptions. Candies and chocolates. If you're going to eat chocolate, choose quality dark chocolate over the high sugar milk chocolate. French fries and potato chips. Whole potatoes are healthy. However, French fries and potato chips don't provide the nutritional benefits that whole potatoes do. And I'm going to end right there because we've got about 6 minutes left, and I will carry on with part 2 next week. Does anybody have any comments or questions before I pause?